All right, we've got our quality assurance that's assuring quality of the service. Andrea?
Nana's asking if you're having technical difficulty.
Shane doesn't have technical difficulties.
I don't believe that.
Now, the tech minister might have some difficulties, but that's why he's got his wife over there checking to make sure that things are running correctly. Thumbs up. Okay, tell your mom, Dad, may lag just a second. So it's very cold, 6 degrees this morning. So, I don't know, man. The Eskimo tribe of our church showed up. My pops were frozen this morning. I should have paid attention to my dad. Maybe that's a good part of this idea of this sermon is Dad was getting a heater yesterday when I ran into him at Sutherland's. Probably should have been a clue that I probably needed to get some too, but I didn't. So I didn't get them yesterday when I should have. So, anybody remember what last week was about? Very nice, very nice. What was the end of it about, Becca?
That they came down from the mountain together.
No, I mean your favorite part.
My favorite part?
Yeah, where
Isaac's reaction. Where's the lamb?
So we get a small snip of the genealogy, and the only name that's it's all a bunch of guys in there except for one daughter gets put in there, and it's Rebecca. And Rebecca is important because we're tracking a seed, right? So you'll see that there's several female names that end up in the lineage, and every time you see one in a genealogy, you really need to pay attention to who and why they're there, because most of the genealogy is tracking the firstborns, right? I told you that was kind of the important thing. So when you see a Rebecca show up in there, or a Rachel, or whatever else you end up seeing in the mix, definitely pay attention to what that's at. So I told you guys that Abraham's fixing to fall off the page. We're fixing to move from Isaac, but even Isaac's not the real big deal. Jacob's going to be the big deal, and that's coming. And we'll see that in a couple, 2-3 chapters. But this one, which is interesting, so I already pre-warned Amy that she's going to make her way into this sermon today. Now, my brother thinks the sermon's about him.
Humility, completely.
Yeah, all about humility. Yeah. So you got the other little speaker working? That's good. So let's start with chapter 23, verse 1. So Sarah lived 127 years. These were the years of the life of Sarah. So Sarah died in Kirjath Arba, which is named Hebron. Hebron, hang on to that. I'm actually going to go back and tell you a little bit about the journey, so geographically. But she died in Hebron in the land of Canaan, and Abraham came to mourn for Sarah and to weep for her. So Sarah lived a long time, 127 years. She was blessed by God. In 37 years, if we're looking at the time frame, it's been 37 years after the birth of Isaac that she died, making Abraham how old? Unless you remember how old? If Isaac's 37? That was a trick question. Huh?
132.
137. Abraham was 100 years old when Isaac was born. I'm trying to make that was like an easy math. And it's been 62 years since Abraham entered Canaan at the direction of God. Everybody kind of catching where we're at? So Abraham, when he left Ur, 62 years have passed. 37 years after the birth of Isaac. So in chapter 12, we know that Abraham moved from Haran, right? And Haran is the land of Ur, of the Chaldeans. And God guided him to settle between Bethel and Ai. Remember, he was on his way to a place called Shechem. And it says that he settled and cast his tent, and he built his first altar to the Lord between Bethel and Ai. Now, after escaping the famine in Palestine into Egypt, gets evicted from the Pharaoh, right? And when he gets evicted, he goes back to the place where he built the altar until he and Lot end up parting companies. And then it says that Abraham moved his tents to the terebinth trees of Mamre, which are in Hebron. So just trying to get back to where he's traveled, because we know he didn't stay there forever. And in Hebron, he builds his second altar. Now, Abraham was at this location when he received the 3 divine visitors that were on their way. Well, one to give him good news, to get Sarah's mind right about who and where the heir was going to come from, but also to go on their way to judge Sodom and Gomorrah. And it wasn't until after the destruction and Lot falls literally off the pages of the biblical account that Abraham picks up his stuff, grabs up his people, and they move to Gerar, right? And that's south. And I told you guys that's literally right there by present-day Gaza. So if y'all pay attention at all to the war over there, you know that Gaza is just a little small area at the south end of Israel that goes out to the Mediterranean Sea. Now, Gerar was a little bit further in, but not much further west. So instead of building, here's the other thing. So while he's in Gerar, he ends up settling in a place that he names later Beersheba. Anybody remember why he named it Beersheba? I'll give you a hint. It had something to do with water and a covenant. And some female lambs. And a king. Oh, you got the ewes. You got the ewes. Now, he ended up calling it, after he gives the 7 lambs to King Abimelech in this covenant. And of course, Abimelech and Phicol were coming there just to make a peace agreement with Abraham, because Abraham had gotten so powerful and strong. And they also knew that God, his God, never calls him their God, but that his God was with him in everything that he did. And they had a fear for God, but they also had, because of that, they had a fear for Abraham and his strength. But when they make the covenant, the 7 ewe lambs, the female lambs, he calls the place Beersheba. And Beersheba is the place that he left when he went to where? For Isaac. Anybody remember the name of that? The sacrifice, Mount what? Yep, Mount Moriah. And Mount Moriah still exists today. It's where the modern day Temple Mount is. So anytime you see a picture from the Mount of Olives across the valley and you see the Dome of the Rock, the Al-Aqsa Mosque, you're looking at Mount Moriah. So not sure how we end back up in Hebron from Beersheba, which is where this story is taking place, but that is where Sarah dies. And the passage reads that Abraham came to mourn for Sarah. Now, it's likely that Sarah's health had declined and Abraham had left her in Hebron to be cared for maidens. That was a pretty traditional thing. Much like a handmaiden or their servants or maidens would take care of them in childbirth. They also assisted during the time of their death, and he went to mourn. And he's obviously not far away, right? I mean, what's going to be interesting, and you won't see it till later with Joseph, but I don't know what all the burial practices were there. There's no Levitical law yet that says, hey, you got to do A, B, and C. That comes with Moses. So these are just traditions that these folks were doing. Obviously, the tradition, as you're going to find, is to be buried, but no evidence that they were embalmed. Although we know that the Egyptians, in and around that time, they embalmed. In fact, they also used coffins. I mean, if you don't believe that, go look at King Tut or anybody else that's ever been unearthed. But they embalmed. They had coffins. They placed them into very extravagant, some very expensive tombs. That was obviously the top of the food chain. Well, at this time, Abraham technically is the top of the food chain. But he wasn't far off, because it doesn't mention anything about embalming. And any of us that's ever been in that world, which Gary and I have spent 30 plus years in that world, when a body dies, it has to be refrigerated, embalmed, or it's got to be entered into the ground relatively quickly. That's just the truth of it. So he wasn't far away when he goes, because it says here in just a minute that he very quickly comes to her side. So in ancient Near East in the Bible, here's the things that were common for the expressions of sorrow at the death of someone that you loved. Loud weeping, tearing clothes, sitting in dirt, wearing sackcloth, shaving your head. You'll find out when Jesus' time comes that because of Levitical law, they would hire some of this. Like if you didn't have somebody to throw a big enough show on at your death, you would hire people to come weep. You would hire people to come mourn. And that's literally what they did. That was their job. You pay them. Yeah, I need 5 mourners, and I need 3 of those people that shave their head and throw dust everywhere. I need those. And and honestly, if you ever travel outside this country, it's very interesting. Some of it that you see. A good example is when you see a wedding. A wedding in the countries that I've been to, they're 3-day events, and they'll start off and march through the whole town. And where you get honored by the town is when you amass a big group. And the same thing was true in death. If you died and a bunch of people showed up, and whether it was in earnest or not, it showed your status. So in verse 3 it says this, "Then Abraham stood up from before his dead and spoke to the sons of Heth, saying, I am a foreigner and a visitor among you. Give me property for a burial place among you, that I may bury my dead out of my sight." Now, the sons of Heth, if we're going to go all the way back to Noah's Ark, the sons of Heth were called the Hittites. And this opening dialogue will show that Abraham's position is elevated in the eyes of the Canaanite region. Does anybody remember who Heth was part of? Now, if you read down the notes a little bit, you're going to get it. Anybody remember Heth?
Canaan?
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 I really expected you to say Shem, because that's usually the first thing you say. You yell Shem.
The silence.
Well, if it is, then yes, you're real close. Because Ham had 4 sons. The last of those sons was named Canaan. And the curse from Noah didn't fall on Ham, it fell on Canaan. And one of Canaan's sons was Heth. And they became the Hittites. So the Hittites appear first in the Table of Nations. And I know it's been a while since we've talked about the Table of Nations, but we studied that in chapter 10 of Genesis. Now Canaan, 4th son of Ham, after they departed from the ark, and Heth was the second-born son of Canaan. So when God tells Abraham that he's going to go into this land, who is it that he's going to ultimately dispossess? The answer is the Canaanites. And the reason we know that is because in Genesis 9, verse 25, it says this.
You got James 1:3.
Nah, just click it and see what happens. Sometimes it doesn't rename them. So then he said, "Cursed be Canaan, a servant of servants he shall be to his brethren." So we know that ultimately through Noah and the curse on Canaan and his descendants, that they will serve at some point Noah's son Shem, right? You got Shem and Japheth, but Shem ends up being the one that gets the lion's share of blessing from Noah. So like his conversation with King Abimelech, Abraham has become a mighty prince among the people of Canaan, and his strength and power are recognized. Now, many people choose to be buried in the place where their family is from, right? Well, where's Abraham's family from?
Way.
So Abraham's got a dilemma. That's a very common, in fact, it's common in our world. Mom, y'all got plots down with your family, right? I mean, it's a very common tradition. It's not something that's new. It's been going on for 4,000 plus years. The thing is Abraham knows that even though his father and his grandfather probably had plenty of burial sites, transporting the body that's in a state of decomposition that far, that's number one, that's a problem. But number two, Abraham knows he's never going back to that family. That's the old school place that he came from. His place is where he's at. And he's looking at, look, I've got to come up with an idea for my family and my descendants, because this is our new home. So Abraham and Sarah, outside of brides for their children, which they do go back to their father's house, because remember, Abraham's already said, even with Isaac, he's not going to want a bride for Isaac that's from the Canaanites. He's not mixing with the Canaanites at all if he can keep from it. We'll find that Israel screws that up down the road quite a bit. So, not just the Hittites, but you're going to see the Moabites that are constant trouble for Israel. So, no small affair. After Sarah's death, Abraham stands up from before his deceased wife, and he looks at the Hittites, and they were obviously present. That also speaks to the level that Abraham was. He was not there with just him and his family and his servants. The people around him in that area were also present. And Abraham seeks a place to bury Sarah. Now, I did a little bit of research. I mean, you may think this is weird. But I went to Llano Cemetery this week, and I reached out to Boxwell Funeral Homes, because one of the things in this book is I'm trying to get a glimpse of how much it costs to bury Sarah. So I scheduled a meeting with Llano, went out to the cemetery, sat down with the guy, and here's what I got from this guy. So a spot in their cemetery for two people sharing a single footstone, not one of them big fancy ones that stand up, just the one that's on the ground, costs approximately $6,600. That's before your casket, and that's before your preparation of funeral expenses. It's a minimum of $1,300 for a casket, which I kind of thought that would be like way more expensive than that. I mean, they do get very expensive, don't get me wrong. But you can buy one for $1,300. And roughly about $5,000 for total burial services. So if you're keeping up with the math, the cheapest burial style funeral, if you're buried in a cemetery in the city of Amarillo, Texas, will cost you more than $10,000. That's if you're buried here. Now, what's interesting, while I'm talking to these guys, they're telling me, well, you got state laws, we got to do A, B, and C. Well, I found out that's not true. Because you go to a small town and you can buy a plot for a couple $100. Very few rules in that world. In fact, you can build your own casket should you so choose to do so. So you can get cheaper. So cremation services, on the other hand, cost approximately $1,600 unless the funeral home hosts a memorial service for you at which the cost of cremation services and memorial services goes back up to around $5,000. So now, of course, the state collects $20 for you to file the death certificate online, $21 for your first copy, $4 for every copy after that. Everybody tracking? It is not cheap to die. So when you think about the idea, it's no cheap affair to bury the dead. But so far, Abraham's has sacrificed some money, right? He's got the 7 ewe lambs that you were talking about. That was money to basically solidify a contract between him and Abimelech. And he was doing that to maintain property rights over the well in Beersheba. He was like, this is my well, and I want you to leave it alone. So the 7 ewe lambs was a sacrifice that he paid for that. But the thing that we do know thus far is that Abraham doesn't own any land. He didn't buy any land. He begins by telling the Hittites, number one, that he's a stranger, an alien, and a foreigner to the land. Now, what's God telling him he's going to be in that land?
His land.
That's going to be his. It's all going to be his at some point. The problem is that day is not this day, and he's got to have a place for Sarah. So no doubt that his father Terah or his grandfather Nahor, they probably had burial land, like I said, in Ur. Haran, by the way, still exists. Haran is in Turkey and is relative to the location Abraham's family lived. But transporting the dead while existent happens very rare in the Bible. Anybody read enough of the Old Testament to know somebody whose body ultimately got transported back to the land of Canaan? Huh? Yeah, I think I kind of think. Good job, Les. That wasn't even in my notes. But Joseph, when he dies in Egypt, he does not want his body to stay there. And he says, and he doesn't say, look, carry my body, because he knows he's not going to have any body by the time they leave. He says, you grab up my bones and you take my bones back to the land that God's promised. That's where he wants his bones to be. Now, what's interesting is we hadn't even got to the idea yet, right? Not one thing truly mentioning the idea of resurrection. But you're going to find that in these guys, that there's an idea that this ain't the end. That this is just merely a stopping point, and we're moving on to something different. Now, an Egyptian-style burial where he was embalmed and placed in a coffin in Egypt is what Joseph was going to have. The Bible talks about that. We'll get there eventually. It's not too far. In fact, I've been reading the Bible chronologically since January 1. Yeah, we're getting there quick. I mean, from where we are right now. But here he begins a proposition to buy property for a burial place from the sons of Heth, the sons of Canaan, and the son of Ham. Now, Abraham knows that he is purchasing a very smart, very smart. Well, Abraham is very smart, but a very small part of what will one day become a vast possession for his family anyway. Now, Genesis 23:5, it says this, and the sons of Heth answered Abraham, saying to him, hear us, my Lord, you are a mighty prince among us. Bury your dead in the choicest of our burial places. None of us will withhold from you his burial place, that you may bury your dead. So what's interesting is that the Hittites answer collectively. So this whole group of people collectively are saying, but Ephron specifically will say, you can have it all. You can have our best places for you. And not only can you have it, none of us will deny you, whatever place you pick. That was the elevated position that Abraham had. It wasn't as if Abraham said, I'll take that one. And they'd be like, well, hold on, not that one. You have to think about this. This isn't just a person. It's a group of people that are collectively coming together saying, we will not withhold our choicest places. So special deference and respect are shown to him. Why?
That's so powerful.
Yeah, he's become a big deal. They're calling him a mighty prince. The thing is what they're really saying is you are a prince of God. And they know that his God follows him and is with him in everything that he does. The idea ultimately comes down, they are saying that God has elected Abraham as a servant, as his special person amongst all the other people. Now, Abimelech and his army commander also recognized that Abraham was a special recipient of divine favor. Now, it's real easy to understand that somebody's a special recipient of divine favor when God wakes you up in the middle of the night, not with Kleenex boxes coming from heaven.
It could happen.
See, that's why Dad don't tell me his dream, because he knows I'm going to blast him out here eventually. But the dream that Abimelech had was God telling him bad things are fixing to come to you. And they knew their God hadn't come and told them anything. Because of Abraham, because of who Abraham was in the sight of the Hittites, did you check that? Did you catch that, Ethan? It rhymed. Who Abraham was in the sight of the Hittites. They exceeded Abraham's request by offering him the choicest of burial sites in their land and telling Abraham that no one will refuse the spot that he picks out. So Abraham does pick a spot. In verse 7 it says this, then Abraham stood up and bowed himself to the people of the land, the sons of Heth. And he spoke with them, saying, it is your wish that I bury my dead out of my sight. Hear me, and meet with Ephron, the son of Zohar, for me, that he may give me the cave of Machpelah, which he has, which is at the end of his field. Let him give it to me at the full price as property for a burial place among you. Now, even though the sons of Heth have recognized the strength and the power of Abraham, and they see that he possesses everything by way of his wealth, his numbers, and his divine favors from God, Abraham's response to the Hittites, much like my brothers, is one of humility. There you go, Brad. I threw you in there.
Thanks, bro.
It is the only place in Genesis where Abraham bows before the inhabitants of Canaan. Uh-oh, give me one sec. I'm about to lose juice here. I guess I should turn that on. Abraham bowed himself to the ground in the presence of God and his angels. Well, remember that. But this is the first time in the book of Genesis that he will bow before the inhabitants of Canaan. Now, Abraham did not bow before Pharaoh. Abraham did not bow before King Abimelech or his commander of the army, Phicol. He didn't bow before the king of Sodom. In fact, he chased and defeated the kings of the east. He extends respect in light of the loss of Sarah. This negotiation of the cave of, and I know it looks like it's spelled Machpelah, but in Hebrew, the C's are silent. Machpelah, owned by Ephraim, the son of Zohar, would be a request for only a portion of the land owned by Ephraim, a plot of land with a field and a cape. And by acquiring a portion, the Hittite would still retain the territorial integrity of the land holding. Now, I'm fixing to start talking Amy's language here in a minute, which is where Amy's coming in. So Abraham's desire to pay the full price and value of the land expresses the patriarch's wealth, number one, and his good faith in negotiating with Ephron. And as a side note, any future intrusion or takebacks from the Canaanites. Based on the wording of the Hittite council that no Canaanite would refuse his request, Ephron had little choice going against the generosity that was already expressed by his people. This generosity will now be expressed here by Ephron. And in verse 10 it says this: Now Ephron dwelt among the sons of Heth, and Ephron the Hittite answered Abraham in the presence of the sons of Heth, all who entered at the gates of the city, saying, No, my Lord, hear me. I give you the field and the cave that is in it. I give it to you in the presence of the sons of my people. I give it to you. Bury your dead. There's some movement here. Abraham, along with the delegation of the Hittites, have journeyed to Ephron's city of residence to make a proposal outside the gate of the city. Now, the gates of the city were a common place for civil transaction. Now, the word, which is kind of interesting, it's blacked out on my notes, is called, I don't know, can't even read it. That's really weird. Can you guys read it in your notes?
I can't see.
Is it black also?
Y-O-S-E-B.
Oh, Yoseb. So Yoseb is lost in the New King James, but here in Ephraim was sitting at the gate, demonstrating, number one, his place of position. We're going to get that in a verse here in Job just a minute, but that he has a prominent position in the city. The gates were a place where transactions would take place, where civic laws and transactions would be discussed, deeds would come in, covenants would happen. And the reason they did that, it was like the idea of the old meeting post. I mean, you've seen that in our Western society back in the old cowboy days, but you have a meeting post. And the post was where everybody would come together. Later, we created the idea of town squares. And town squares was a place where everybody in the town would meet. Business would be discussed about the town. And all kinds of things happened in town squares. Sometimes you'd be hanging people in the town square, but it was an idea that the public would come to meet at that place, and the business of that city would be discussed. Now, in Job 29:7, it says this: Then I went out to the gate by the city when I took my seat in the open square. And Job's talking about his position. The young men saw me and hid, and the aged arose and stood. What did that mean about Job in that place?
His honor and respect.
Had a lot of respect, had a lot of power. When he came in, the young men would go hide themselves. They didn't want to be in his presence. And the old men, when he showed up, they stood up and gave him the proper respect. The idea that the sons of Heth and all who entered heard shows that the public awareness of this transaction. Now, apparently a transaction with the alien foreigner, Abraham, draws a large gathering, right? I mean, I guaranteed everybody already knows that Abraham defeated the kings of the east. They already know that King Abimelech in the south has created covenants with him. They probably know a little bit about Pharaoh evicting him out of fear. So the rumors of Abraham and his sheer size and wealth made him somebody worthy of seeing, hey, what kind of transaction is he making with our people? Now we know how some have treated foreign travelers so far in Genesis, right? Pharaoh and King Abimelech both kidnapped Sarah. The inhabitants of Sodom wanted to rape the divine visitors that were sent to Lot. So ill treatment of foreigners was definitely a thing in Canaan and Egypt. It's hard to say if Ephron's position is a true act of gratuity or a bargaining strategy, or maybe it's just a way to keep face in the midst of the generous proposal that his people have already made. But instead of money, Ephron offers the cave and the field as what?
Yes.
Yeah, 3 times actually. Ephron says give 3 times in this verse. This threefold proclamation does match the 3 times requested by Abraham for the sons of Heth to give him land to bury Sarah in verses 4 and 9. Now, if you've ever been outside the United States, or if you've ever purchased a car in the United States, then you've all experienced the detrimental effect. Well, I know Brad, for instance, you've experienced the detrimental effect of buying a Kia that cannot be insured.
We're still experiencing it.
Right? But we've all experienced the detrimental effects that haggling can produce, right? It's like I hate doing it. I hate going to buy, I hate haggling over price. That is why Amy made it to my notes. Because Amy has become my go-to for purchasing vehicles. I just send Amy hey, I want this car. And she finds me that car, she haggles for that car, and then I just walk in and sign the paperwork. Because she's already done the thing I hate the most. And I do know this, Amy has a true gift for it. I mean, it doesn't matter if we're in Ruidoso and she finds this thing that's got a $100 price tag, she's not buying it for $100. That's a fact. She's going to get that thing down to brass tacks, and almost to the point that I won't go. I won't go. Or if once I know she's going to start haggling, I leave. Because there's just something in my spirit that I'm like, I don't know, I can't do it. But just because I can't do it doesn't mean that I don't appreciate the fact that she can do it. So here's the thing I know. We know Amy has a sweet spirit, but that's only because you haven't been on the receiving end of her haggling. I mean, I promise you don't want to try to sell something to Amy. But the thing I do know about Amy is that she gets the best deal. It's a hostile environment for sure. And it's something, honestly, I probably would never do that. If Amy says, like the exact opposite, if Amy says, hey, this toilet paper roll is worth $100, I'll be like, take it. I'll take it. I'll pay $100.
Amy and Dad have a lot in common.
The thing is that in that world, Amy's good at it. And she comes out a winner every time. That's why I let her negotiate for me. Because I don't. I get tired of it. And I usually get mad. At some point between the back and forth, I get mad. I either pay full price, or if I'm haggling at the end of it, you will be a mortal enemy of mine. Because you know what I'm saying? And I get it. They're just trying to make a buck. And I think, I don't know, maybe you see it that way. It's just truly business, right? Or is it personal to you when you do it?
No, it's just business.
Yeah, just business. That's what I'm saying. It doesn't stay business with me. It eventually becomes personal at some point. So, verse 12 says this. Now then Abraham bowed himself down before the people of the land. Right? Second time he's done that. And he spoke to Ephron in the hearing of the people of the land, saying, if you will give it, please hear me. I will give you money for the field. Take it from me, and I will bury my dead there. Now, for the second time, Abraham bows again, expressing Brad's apparently great attributes of gratitude and humility before negotiating further. Now, is Abraham truly negotiating? What did he say he would give him for it?
Full price.
He ain't asking for a discount. They've offered to give it to him for free. He's like, no, I don't want it for free. I don't even want to haggle. I'll pay you full price for this thing. Abraham's not just securing a burial site for Sarah. He's securing a burial site for future generations of his family. Now, Abraham accepts the offer of the field, but his preference here is a formal arrangement involving the purchase price and the presence of the town's witnesses. Now, in much the same way that Abraham refused the gifts from the king of Sodom, remember, when he had defeated all the kings of the east, gone all the way up to Damascus, grabbed Lot, came back, brought all this stuff, and the king of Sodom wanted to give him his share of the booty for going and doing all this stuff. And Abraham said, I don't want it. Give it to my two guys, to these other two groups that came with me that helped me do it. Let them have their share. I don't want it. And the thing is Abraham, much like Isaac, much like Jacob, they know that God is going to take care of them, and they don't want anybody saying that they somehow helped them get from point A to point B, that God has done it all for them. So he doesn't want to diminish his standing by accepting the gifts of the people that he knows that God's eventually going to evict and kick out. Some of that attitude may be influenced because he knows that God's going to dispossess the people, all of these people at some point, from the land that his descendants will inherit. But in verse 14 it says, and Ephron answered Abraham, saying to him, my Lord, listen to me. The land is worth 400 shekels of silver, but what is that between you and me? So bury your dead. And Abraham listened to Ephron, and Abraham weighed out the silver for Ephron. Where? Where is he weighing this out at?
Gates, I guess.
Yeah, everything is being seen by witnesses. It says he weighed out the silver for Ephron, which he had named in the hearing of the sons of Heth, 400 shekels of silver, currency of the merchants. So finally, we get to a price. All this haggling, all this wheeling and dealing, we get to a price at 400. I guarantee you, Amy could have got that for 200. Easy. Now, we don't know if that was a fair price, a generous price, based on the way the Hittites said that they were going to do business with Abraham, or if it was extravagant or expensive. Who knows? But here's what I'll tell you. Here's what 400 shekels of silver is worth today. A shekel is about half an ounce of silver. So an ounce of silver at the time of this sermon averages $23.33 so far in 2024. So roughly 400 shekels is worth $4,666 at today's prices for 200 ounces or 12.5 pounds of silver. Does that sound like a lot, Ethan? I mean, you're getting a cave and some field and some things. I mean, does that seem like a lot?
Not for a plot.
Okay. Andrew's saying that seems like a good deal. So hold on. Let me take that out a little bit further. So in Jesus' time, a denarius was considered a day's wages. Now that wage comes out to $7.25 an hour or $43.50 a day in average America, which was considered $14,580 for a single person in 2023. Anybody think they can live on that? Okay, that's true. Now, a shekel was worth 4 denarius, or about $174 a piece in buying power during Jesus' time, making the price of this land somewhere between $69,600 and $100,000 in today's buying power of money. Now, does it seem a little more pricey? You're getting up around $100,000. So Ephron presents the price as irrefutable by minimizing the expense against the significance of the land deal. Now, what is 400 shekels between you and me, indicating that their newly formed relationship supersedes any advantage gained by further squabbling over the price, and tells Abraham to bury his dead. This repeats the language that the Hittites' initial offer from Abraham to bury his dead in the choicest of their tombs. Now, I don't know if Abraham chose the choicest of the tombs, but I guarantee you he bought it to his advantage. And you have to remember, he loved Sarah. Now, I don't know 400 shekels in his world. I suspect he had way, way more than that. In fact, we know when he left Egypt the first time, the Pharaoh gave him 1,000 shekels. So Abraham, unlike Amy, doesn't haggle at all. He pays the full price that was asked, and he accepts it without reservation. The point of this verse is that the transaction is legitimate and permanent, and it's conducted in the presence of many witnesses, with Abraham weighing out the silver in view of those same witnesses that had gathered in the idea of a town square, but at the gates where business was transacted. And in verse 17 it says, so the field of Ephron, which was in Machpelah, which was before Mamre, the field and the cave which was in it, and all the trees that were in the field, which were within all the surrounding borders, were deeded to Abraham as a possession in the presence of the sons of Heth before all who went in at the gate of his city. Now, why do you think Moses goes to so much trouble to talk about a simple transaction? I mean, that would be almost like if Amy signs a loan at the credit union and it somehow got a whole chapter of the book. Any idea?
Is the first land of their promise?
Well, it's definitely the first piece of land that's actually for sure his now, right? In the land that God's given it to him anyway. And not that Abraham's doing like what him and Sarah did when Sarah pretended to be his sister, or all these other things that he would do trying to get to navigate through the promises, or when she gave him Hagar to try to get him a son, or any of those things. This is very different, and that he is treating with humility the people that he knows that God will dispossess of the land, and he's taken the high road. He's not using his power. He's not using his influence. He's not using any of that to try to keep these people under his thumb. He's coming into them. He's bowing twice, and he's paying them the full price that they ask. He's treating them well. And I'm going to tell you, that's going to come in here in just a little bit, because it's the point that I got. I read multiple commentaries for this piece of this part of Genesis. And part of it was I was having trouble finding some real meat, to be able to push out. Because sometimes some things don't always go deep theologically, and this is kind of one of those. But I did get something that I actually didn't get it out of the commentaries, but just something I've seen with Israel. Now, these two verses record the information of the transaction, the property's location, the parties that are involved, and the witnesses to the transaction. The land purchased in the field of Machpelah included the trees, the cave, the deed effectively drawn up to transfer the property rights to Abraham. In the presence of all of these witnesses, a formal record of a deed, even though it mentions nothing about it being in writing. Now, it's kind of the way it was in if you look at our country, there was a time when you could conduct business with just a handshake, and that was good. Now, I don't know if you want to do that anymore. Probably not a good idea. Now, everything should be in writing with witnesses that aren't your witnesses, but third-party witnesses. That's where the, what do you call it when they put the old stamp on names? Yeah. You usually get a notary public to do those things now because they're third parties. They ain't got no dog in the fight. But there's no mention of a written document produced. So in verse 19, it says this, and after this, Abraham buried Sarah, his wife, in the cave of the field of Machpelah, before Mamre, that is Hebron, in the land of Canaan. So the field and the cave that is in it were deeded to Abraham by the sons of Heth as property for a burial place. Now Moses says this is the second time this is even mentioned. But if there is an argument over whether there is any theological significance in this chapter, like I said, the commentators I read, they didn't really find any. But here's what I want to talk about as I'm closing about this transaction. Today, Israel is under increasing scrutiny from nations arguing that, number one, that Israel's response to the massacre of October 7th violates the conventions of civilized society. And some are calling their response genocide, and others accuse Israel of committing war crimes. I don't know if y'all caught that South Africa wanted to file that there was war crimes being committed by Israel this week. I don't think that's going to go anywhere. But in my opinion, Israel has always shown an immense amount of restraint, and for a host of reasons. Number one, they're a mere 75 years in the land as a recognized nation. Number two, they're surrounded by people that mostly want to eradicate them and and blot them from the face of the earth, with Western nations really being their only support in the region, not taking into account, obviously, that the everlasting God calls them his people. What's really interesting is they've even found themselves at the end with churches. Churches have long become anti-Semitic and created replacement theology. If you want to see the real culprits of replacement theology, there's some guys that I really do respect some of their theological work, but Martin Luther King was one of those. I said King. Sorry. That's it. I got Martin Luther King holiday on my mind tomorrow. Martin Luther. Also, who's one of my favorites? The one you don't like that much?
Calvin?
Yeah, John Calvin. Those were both guys that kind of went down the road of replacement theology, that Israel was no longer their thing, that the church, the Gentile church, had replaced them. We know for a fact, and I could preach that all day and go toe to toe with people theologically, that is not true. God is not done with the land of Israel at all. In fact, Paul was very specific in that sure, not all that calls himself Israel is Israel, but those that do the will of the Father, that's true. That's the ones that will inherit the blessing that Abraham received. But Paul went on to say that, look, they're blinded in part, right? They have a partial blindness, but that all of Israel will eventually be saved. And Paul was basing that on scriptures found in Zechariah, scriptures found in Ezekiel, scriptures found in Isaiah. But it requires them, speaking of Israel, to deal justly and fairly with all people, because there is no greater microscope on a nation than the land of Israel. Of all of the complaints that go before the United Nations about any country on the planet that are doing ill to other nations of the planet, Israel gets about 80 to 85% of those complaints over everybody else in the world. One little small country that doesn't even have 10 million people living in it. But they get 80 to 85% of the complaints that go before the United Nations. So they know that. They know that they are the only people on the planet that people have tried to literally eradicate down to zero. There's been no final solution for white people in America. There's been no final solution to get rid of Canadians. No final solution to get rid of Mexicans in Mexico. But there has been final solutions to eradicate the world of what the world believes to be a parasite called Israel. That has happened. Not just one time, but it's happening now before our very eyes. So Israel's enemies launch very unsophisticated rockets, if you paid attention to the war in Gaza, and mortars, and they bear no guidance systems. They have zero precision, meaning that once they launch those things, they have no idea where they're going to land. They could land in the ocean, land in a field, or they could land on a soccer field full of kids playing soccer. That's all they can do. They don't know what they're going to do. Israel, on the other hand, spends a crazy amount of money to protect their people. About $1 million for every missile that's launched from the Iron Dome, or to put it into some perspective, prior to October 11th or 7th, $2.5 billion since it was first built just to put the rockets in the thing to knock other rockets out of the air. And no telling how many of those things they've launched since October 7th. But they have precision-guided munitions that cost millions of dollars per launch, and advanced fixed installations. So you saw the outrage of the alleged missile attack, if you guys remember, near the hospital in Gaza, that everyone accused Israel of launching missiles from their aircraft, and it led to riots and protests all over the world, which were later determined to be a failed missile launch from Hamas. The original number of deaths that they said came at the hands of Israel was over 400 people. But when they finally figured out it was one of their own missiles launched by Hamas, the number dropped to about 30 people, and it just hit a parking lot and didn't hit the hospital after all. Even Canada's Prime Minister Justin Trudeau had to recant his irresponsible remarks about Israel. The point is this: Israel, as a people led by God, like we see here in Abraham, they traditionally take the high road. By all appearance, they want to live in peace and to be left alone. No longer closing the doors to the outside world, there are significant numbers of Arab, a little over 2 million, that live in the land of Israel, and they benefit from Israel's explosive economy. Israel opens the door to Christians, Muslims, and Jews alike, who are allowed to worship and conduct services in their land and are protected by the Israeli police and their military. And much like Abraham, and very contrary to the false images of the Jews being rich, money hungry, and stingy with their resources, Israel contributes a great deal of their national value to other people and nations as a sign of their willingness to follow the world's decorum. Or in Abraham's mind, waiting on the hand of God to perform his will. Now, they still believe very much that they have an advocate in the God of Israel. Now, they're very secular, kind of like our country is. Not all of them are very religious. But those that do believe that God is still the God of Israel and will take care of them in the face of their enemies. Now, my suspicion is that this current matter will continue escalations of this war, that it will continue escalation of protests and anti-Semitical fervor throughout the world, and may ultimately culminate into the wars that I've mentioned in Ezekiel 38 and 9. That's where I think it's going. We can only pray for Israel and support them in any way that we can find, right? We're going and leaning very heavily upon the verses of Genesis chapter 12, right? And what did it say in chapter 12? Do you remember, Brad?
All those who bless Israel will be blessed, and all those who condemn her will be wrath.
Yeah, here's the thing about the Bible, guys. When I read it, I believe it. And I'm not getting away from it. If God had written something in there that said specifically, I've canceled this, you don't even got to worry about those Israelites no more. Don't worry about them promises to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Okay, maybe. But where would that lead us? If God doesn't keep his promises to those people, what makes you think he's going to keep it to you? I don't want him to fail on the promises to Israel at all. Because I know that God has proven throughout the Bible to be 100% on every promise that he's ever made. He's always fulfilled it. And I believe 100% he's faithful to complete and fulfill the promises he's already given to Abraham. Now, we as a church, we do support 3 ministries specifically in Israel. Those include So Be It. We give money to One for Israel, and we give some money to Behold Israel. Back when this war started and all these people had bought all of this merchandise for the tourists that were coming to Israel that obviously didn't come, I bought some Dead Sea shampoo, I don't know, we bought some things. And I know you and Amy did the same thing, but we bought some things just to try to support them a little bit. I promise you that every bit of that you do for them, specifically for Israel, God will bless you forever. And here's the thing, I'll show you a verse that speaks just that. As Christians, we know that anything we do for them, it's as if we had done it directly to Christ himself. In fact, Matthew 25:37-40 says this, "Then the righteous will answer him, saying, Lord, when did we see you hungry and feed you, or thirsty and give you drink? When did we see you a stranger and take you in, or naked and clothe you? Or when did we see you sick or in prison and come to you? And the king will answer and say to them, Assuredly, I say to you, inasmuch as you did it to one of the least of these my brethren, you did it to me." Now, Matthew chapter 25 comes right after Matthew 24. I mean, you guys figured that out yet? But in Matthew chapter 24, he's speaking, and he's still speaking specifically to his disciples. Matthew 24, probably one of my favorites, but it's called the Olivet Discourse. It's where he talks about a lot of things of the end time. It goes through into 25. He begins to pray for for his disciples. But in this, he's telling them specifically, when he's speaking of brethren, he's speaking of his Jewish brethren and sisters. So he's talking about Jewish brothers and sisters, not just talking about the church specifically. Does have things that he says about the church. Comes out a lot more in the epistles later. But this one he's talking about what you do for the Jews. Now, why do you think Jesus would throw that in there, specifically about the Jews?
Because they're rejecting him and he's still the chosen people.
Because he's a merciful and graceful God, and looking down the road, he knows that the Jews, they're going to eat a horrible sandwich for a long time, for 2,000 years. And they have. From that day forward, they have been destroyed and scattered and occupied with people trying to exterminate them and destroy them, with more anti-Semitic. I've never seen so much about another group in the history of my life than those pointed directly at the Jews. I mean, you don't see people doing that about the Ukrainians or the Russians or the China. You ain't see nobody out there protesting China. I guarantee you, China this year most likely will take over Taiwan. I can't wait to see all the protests over that. I mean, they're killing tons of people. Turkey, Erdogan has killed tons of Kurds. Millions. Where's the protest? I mean, Russia has been in Ukraine all this time. You got a couple 100,000 people dead. Where are the protests? Or go down into Africa. They're slaughtering people down there. They're killing Christians. In fact, this morning I saw on Daily Wire, they were forcing the Christians to convert to Islam or die. Where's the protest? I mean, where's the riots? You're not going to see it for anybody. And Amir always says it, and I love it. No Jews, no news. But that's the truth. If it ain't got the Jews in it, nobody cares. Nobody's even going to pay attention to it. So I'm going to end by saying a prayer specifically for them and for us. You know, Father God, we know that there is a day coming where you will finally tell your son, go fetch your church. It's time. And we realize, God, that the promises and the blessings and even the curses that you've given throughout the Bible, you're 100% in fulfilling those promises, those blessings, those covenants. We know that you have not forgotten the people of Israel. And God, we lift them up to you today. We know that they still have a partial blindness, but they're not fully blind, God. And we know that final book of our Bible, that 7-year period is a time of getting their minds right and of bringing them back to you, God. We know that you're faithful to do those things. But God, in the interim, I pray that we listen to the words of your Son when he told us that anything we did for their sake was as if we had done it to him himself. So, Father, don't let us get trapped in this idea of anti-Semitism. Don't let us take the sides of the wicked or the murderous or whatever has become popular throughout the world, God. Because if any time in history requires a moral compass, it's this time. So, God, I pray that you do that for us. Let us stay grounded in your word. Let us stay grounded to your promises, God. Pray for all those that couldn't be here today. God, it was very cold. I pray that none of our pipes bust. I pray that you protect everybody in their homes. And God, that you continue through your Holy Spirit to guide us into all the truth. And we ask these things in the name of Jesus. Amen.